Hello, Chris Sexton here with Team Synergy, and welcome to night one on the Synergy 766 build video series. This has been an extremely exciting time for Synergy. Not only are we breaking into a new size class, but we're bringing a few new toys to our table. As you can see for me here, I have laid out the bits and pieces we're going to deal with tonight. I've decided to break the videos up into hopefully smaller pieces and not be 20-25 minutes long like they were with the N7 and the E7. What we're going to focus on first is we're going to talk about the main frames, the front transmission, the motor mounts, a couple of new exciting things with the motor mounts, bits and pieces of the carbon. We're not actually going to use this tonight. I just threw that in a picture because it's pretty. Here's the battery tray, the Delwyn battery tray guides. Everything we need to talk about tonight is right here. But first and foremost, I want to talk about this. Those of you who have built Matt Butto's kits before have seen this letter before. A lot of manufacturers give you printed manuals, and while I know some of you would probably prefer that Synergy followed suit, it is far more important to us that you always have the most accurate, up-to-date manual available. So in the box you will find a simple letter from Matt thanking you for the purchase of your unit and telling you where to find not only the current version of the manual available at the time of this kit shipping, but where to find the most recent manuals and Team Synergy support 24/7. I suggest you take 2 seconds and read that. It's got a lot of cool little bits and pieces of information on it. We are going to follow the manual to the letter with one exception tonight. I am going to start with the main transmission just because there's some things in here that we're going to use green Loctite on. And green Loctite has a nasty habit of wicking into bearings and ruining things. So I'm going to start with this, give the at least the bits and pieces that need green Loctite, and give them lots of time to cure before we try to reassemble the transmission for assembly into the frames a little later. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the camera. I'm going to clear my workspace, open up some of these baggies, and when you come back, we'll be talking about this guy. Okay, here we go. As we talked about earlier, I am going to, in this video, change one aspect of the manual. The manual has you start directly into the side frames and then has you build this when you come to it. I am going to deviate from that plan slightly, and I am going to tear this down and build this first. The reason being is the pins that go through this counter shaft and key against the spur gear here need to be Loctited in, and I strongly recommend the use of green Loctite. The problem with green Loctite is most stores sell the penetrating oil type, which is really super thin and wicks into bearings really easy. So I'm going to tear this down completely, and I will show you the bits and pieces we're going to use for Loctite. And then I'm going to assemble the Loctited only sections first and set them aside and give them time to cure, so that when the manual catches up to me, this will have plenty of time to cure and I can assemble the transmission with no risk of that green wicking into these bearings. So I'm going to cut the camera and tear this down. Okay, we're back. As you can see, I now have the front torque tube transmission completely torn down. The gears are out. The carbon fiber side pieces are here. This is a really nice touch. This is all 2mm precision machine cut carbon fiber. All of the 3mm bolts and the standoffs and the set screws are all set aside. As you can see, all of my bearings assemblies are out of the way, so I can deal with this guy without having any risk of getting green Loctite in anything. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see this. What I have here, this is the meat and potatoes of the front drivetrain. This is a 27 tooth hard coat metal spur gear. Now this gear will probably never wear out, but Matt does offer 3 different sizes for adjustable tail ratios. Out of the box, it does come with the 27 tooth, but a 25 tooth and a 28 tooth are optional, depending upon if you need a faster or slower tail. I have been running the 27 tooth with 116mm tail blades on my Alpha kit model at a variety of head speeds from anywhere as low as 1500 all the way up to 2000, and having absolutely zero tail authority problems. So I think that most of you will be very satisfied with the 27. But there are some arguments to be made if you decide you're going to run even lower RPMs, or you try to get away with smaller tail blades. So that's user serviceable. Like all Synergy torque tube drive transmissions, the front bevel gear is held in onto the spur shaft with a counter pin, and that pin is held into place with a set screw coming out of the top of the shaft. It is very important, and I see this missed on the E5 and E7, even the N7 all the time. You need to remove that set screw, remove this pin, which should push out of there relatively easy, and then pull this gear off and check for debris and machine burrs down in the grooves. Clean it all out, reassemble it, and use Loctite on that set screw. If you forget to Loctite that set screw, that pin will come out in flight. It's only a matter of time, and you'll lose your tail and things can get fun fast. Again, we talked about, I skipped ahead to the transmission first because I want to show you the parts that do require some green Loctite. We want to give that plenty of time to cure. As you can see, the spur gear comes off the shaft like that, and here's another one of those pins. This is an area we're going to use green. Because this is not a part that should likely ever wear out, at least not before you hit hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of flights, this is a part that's a perfect candidate for green Loctite. Because green Loctite is basically permanent. It's not going to give this. You're not going to develop slop in this gear and this pin slowly eat away at the spur gear. It's going to remain solid and keep your tail nice and crisp. So this is definitely an area you want to use green and give it plenty of time to cure. So I'm going to cut the camera, take my pin out, clean all that up, and when we come back, I'll have this all Loctited together and ready to set aside. Okay, so I have my transmission gears, my pins all out, set screw aside, ready to start Loctite and stuff, but I want to take a second. I always talk about the importance of Loctite, but I never really go into it in detail, and I'm not going to go into too much detail now, but I just want to reiterate the importance of using quality name brand Loctites. I prefer to use something that tells me what number I'm using. Now we can have arguments to a blue in the face on the difference between 271 and 274, or 242 and 244, 241, penetrating Loctites versus medium gap filling greens. Find the chemistry that works the best for you, but stick to a name brand. A lot of the off brands or the brands you might find in a hobby store, unless they're clearly labeled what's in the bottle, and I mean not just red or blue or green, if it doesn't tell you the number so you can look up on a chart to decide if that's appropriate for your application, you could be asking for trouble. I see a lot of guys, even with electrics that should be super smooth and not be losing bolts, always having to retighten bolts because they're using substandard Loctites. I also note, you notice I don't have big giant bottles here. There is such a thing as too much Loctite. You don't have to put so much Loctite on there it cakes. You're just adding extra work for yourself. So that's my little spiel. I've learned the hard way. Rob Cherry's probably laughing as he watches this. Matt Bodos is probably chuckling a little bit. I have been one of the guys who've learned the hard way that not all Loctites are created equal. So I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to take my green. And for the record, this is the Permatex penetrating grade. This is the super thin stuff. This is the stuff that can get you in trouble really fast, which is why I'm doing it first and giving it plenty of time to cure. If I had my druthers and could find a place local that sold it, I would buy green 638. It's a medium gap filling Loctite. It's really good for bearing retainer. It's really good for places you don't ever want to have to take apart, but it doesn't wick into bearings, into nooks and crannies quite as badly as this does. So if you're going to buy what I've got, the penetrating kind, be aware this will ruin bearings easily if you're not careful. I'm going to go ahead and stop the camera. I'm not going to bore you with making you watch me actually build every little piece of this. I'll come back when I've got the Loctite curing. Okay, so here we are. Now I have finished putting my gears together. I've got the pin removed. I ran the set screw all the way through the trowel to make sure there was no debris or burrs in the threads there from machining. I put the gear back on. I'm a big fan of using red Loctite here. In fact, I use red Loctite anywhere on the drivetrain that could cause me to have a catastrophic failure. It makes disassembly for repairs a little bit more tricky, but at least I know that set screw's not going anywhere. On this end, it's a little harder to tell, but I'm holding this together on purpose because I'm trying to keep it from curing. But I used my green Loctite I put a little bit on the shaft and a little bit on the cross pin, and it has been probably 5 to 6 minutes. I stopped to check on the kids and whatnot in the meantime, so it's been curing for a little bit. I'm going to set this aside. I am using my pinion support bearing, but I'm setting it away over here on the side to eat up that clearance. There's no chance the green get anywhere near the bearing, and that's going to allow simple gravity to keep that pin in place while that cures. So I'm going to set that aside. Can't do a whole lot of reassembly with this transmission without those gears. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little Ziploc bag, put the loose parts in there, set them aside, and get back to the assembly process as stated in the manual. So when we come back, I'll have the main frame sitting here, and we'll talk about the frame spacers. Okay, here we go. From this point forward, we are following the manual for the rest of the evening. Step 1 in the manual is the frame side 1, which happens to be the left side or driver's side of the frame, so to speak. In this step, we're going to install the first of the 2 Delrin guides for the battery tray. We're going to install a couple of the frame spacers, as well as one of the quick releases for the front canopy. I want to take a quick second to talk about carbon. As with all Synergy kits, Matt has used a high quality multi-layer 2mm carbon fiber single piece for his side frame. Matt really keeps on his machine shop about changing the router bits often, so you shouldn't see a lot of really haggard ends and edges. It is still a good idea to take some 1000 grit sandpaper, something really fine, and a little bit of water. You do not want to breathe carbon dust, so always get it wet. And then slightly sand the edges. I've already done that. As you can see, there are no sharp edges on this carbon. I didn't bother doing that on camera because it's messy, and I did it over my kitchen sink. But it would be a good idea, just before you even get started too far, take some wet sandpaper and hit all the edges. It just helps with battery routing later. While we take steps to protect our wiring, it's still not a bad idea to keep those sharp edges down. So we are going to install some things onto this mainframe. One thing I want to point out, and I don't know how well I'll be able to show it on the camera, but I'm going to zoom in and try. This battery tray, it has an orientation. There is a groove, and that, as you would imagine, that is the groove that the battery tray actually slides through. That is the bottom side of the battery tray. So when you're putting this on the frame, you have to pay attention. This is the bottom of the frame. So the groove needs to be closest to the bottom of the frame, so that when the tray is assembled, everything lines up, the battery's where it needs to be. So I'm not going to make you sit here and watch me install those screws, so I'm going to stop the camera. When we come back, I will have the tray in, and we'll talk about these differences in battery and frame spacers. Alright, I'm going to cut the camera back in for a second and talk about this last screw on the Delrin tray. This is machined 3mm bolt going into Delrin. I put a drop of CA on the tip of that. Highly recommend that. And then when you're putting these in, you want to be mindful. It would be extremely easy to take your big 2.5mm wrench and over tighten that bolt and strip out the threads, because you've got to remember, you're drilling in the Delrin. Screwing in the Delrin. It's cutting threads as it goes, so you just want to snug that up. Let the CA cure, good medium CA, let the CA cure and keep the bolt from spinning back out. There you go, I got the one tray side in. This front mount for the canopy, this is a very familiar sight. Most of you guys are going to recognize it. These are something that was released initially for the N7 and quickly, the E5, and was quickly adapted to the E7 SE and the N7. These are really nice. Can include integrated breakaway tab, metal housing with a quick release style insert. Those go right here in the frame. Now obviously you want to put this in now. If you try to put this in a little bit later, like say when the motor is in, you're going to have a hard time getting your wrench on this nylock nut to tighten it up. So this is part of step 1 for a very good reason, and it's going to go right here. It's pretty obvious where it goes because there's one hole that is bigger than the rest to make room for the head of the 2.5 that's going into the quick lock retainer, and then the smaller hole is where you'll actually put the 2.5 that's holding, actually I think that's a 3 mil, excuse me, 3 mil that's holding the quick lock tab goes through there. So I'm going to cut the camera, install this quick release, and we'll talk about the frame spacers. Okay, step 1 of the manual is now done. The side frame piece is complete as far as it goes for right now. Got the, again, front side panel standoff in place, lower rear canopy standoff in place, and the quick release for the nose canopy installed, as well as the Delrin track for the battery. The next step in the manual actually has us build the boom block, as well as the boom mount with the RX tray, as well as the lower rear frame spacer and carbon fiber brace. The reason it has you jump to there is we're going to build all of the guts, mount the transmission, mount the boom block, mount the frame spacers and the CF plate, all tentatively. We won't use Loctite on the side panel just yet. Get all the guts installed so that when you build the right side frame piece, to sandwich it all together, it's just a lot easier. And then we'll talk about the importance of squaring the frame. So I'm going to cut the camera and get ready for the boom pieces. Okay, here we go with step 2 in the manual. We are going to be assembling the boom mounts with the RX tray that goes across the top, as well as setting up the installing the carbon fiber brace on the rear frame spacers. These are pretty straightforward. The frame spacers used in this step actually take 4mm bolts, so they're fatter than the standard frame spacers, so it makes them really easy to find. Also, 2 of these 4mm bolts are longer than the rest because they are used for the boom supports later. So when we go to mount the assembly to the frame side, where the bolts go isn't terribly critical. You can always move the bolt if you start to put it in the wrong place, but just be advised, you have 2 longer bolts here for a reason. I am going to cut the camera and assemble this. It's pretty straightforward. There are some 2.5mm button head screws that hold the CF plate to the tops of the boom blocks, and some recessed Phillips 2mm machine screws to hold the carbon fiber block to the rear frame supports. So when we come back, I'll have that all assembled. There you go. The boom mounts, blocks rather, with the RX tray and the rear lower carbon fiber brace, which also has the bolts for the boom supports for later. That is that step. I do believe, and I want to double check the manual fast, I do believe it has us going, yep, it's going to have us take the frame side we've already built and put these on it next. So when we come back, I'll have these on the frame side and I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so step 2 of the manual, which puts us back on the left frame side. We take the rear lower carbon support and the boom mount and boom block assembly, and loosely, and I want to emphasize loosely, mount it to the side piece. Once we get all the guts installed and get we go to tighten up the 2 frame sides together, we're going to set this on a glass surface. I use my glass top. I have a smooth top glass range. I could also use the marble on my fireplace if I need to, but you need a good true glass surface. It's very helpful because you want to Loctite these and tighten up all these side pieces on a square surface so that the frame tightens up square. So these are just loosely, they're snug down, they're not going to move around, but there is no Loctite on either of the 4 boom mount, boom block bolts, or these 2 bolts on the side, on the spacers. So again, very important, save the Loctite for when we're sandwiching the steps together. The manual next has us do what I've already done with this transmission piece, which has now had at least half an hour maybe 40 minutes to cure. So that'll be safe to start putting back together. So I'm going to cut the camera and get the transmission parts laid out. Okay, so here we have the bits and pieces that will form the front transmission when we put it back together. Again, I'm going to point a couple things before I start assembling. This front mushroom gear comes pre-assembled. It's already in the bearings, already pressed into the housing. It is a good idea that you check to make sure that this mushroom gear is seated all the way up against these bearings. You could have an issue where maybe in shipping or an initial assembly didn't get all the way seated. If that's not seated against those bearings, when you build this transmission, the mesh up here is going to be very notchy. And we'll talk about that in a second, but this is a good time. Just take a second, visual it, make sure, give a good visual inspection, make sure it looks seated. If we get it all test fit together and it feels notchy, we'll know where to look next. So I'm going to go ahead and since I've already talked about what I did to glue all of this, the only thing left to talk about is to check the manual. I did break it all the way down. Which pieces go where and what bolts go where are pretty self-explanatory, but just follow the manual. You can't go wrong. It'll get it all together for you. When I come back, I will have the transmission assembled and Loctited, and it can be ready to go in the frame. Okay, so transmission is all back together. Very careful here. Make sure you get the set screws to go between the standoff and the side plates fairly evenly spaced, so you have good threads in both the standoff and the side plates. Again, be very careful to torque things down evenly. My mesh is absolutely perfect. If I hold this gear, I got just an ever so bit of mesh. I call it slop, although slop's probably the wrong word. Feels great. It's nice and smooth. Everything moves as it should. This bad boy is ready to go in the frame. The next step in our instructions is to do just that. We're going to take this side frame that we've already built, and we are going to, again, tentatively, because we don't want to use Loctite until we go to mesh up the side plates. Oops, I got it upside down. We are going to tentatively mount the transmission in the side plates so that we're one step closer to marrying these frame halves together. Okay, here we have it. Our torque tube front transmission is in the frame again loosely. This will move around. I did not snug down the bolts yet because not only do we have to wait and square up the frame, but this will be the absolute last thing we tighten up because we have to use this ability to slide to set the gear mesh on the auto rotation gear. So no Loctite on these 4 bolts at all. It is important to note that these 4 bolts do have these aluminum washers on them. That does a couple of things. One, it gives a larger surface area for the tension to be squeezed down on, so that it's less likely to move. It also looks a lot better. Smooth, it slides. So the mesh is going to slide a little easier on the carbon fiber. Nothing wrong with a little functional bling. The next step of the manual actually has us taking the main bearing blocks and dealing with those. I'm going to stop here for a little bit. I need to do a little prep work. I'll explain that when I come back, and back shortly.